0.30, which began life, this new film by Kathryn Bigelow, began life as the tale of the failed hunt for Osama bin Laden. During the writing process, because Osama bin Laden was found, and as Bigelow herself said, this required a major rejig. At first she thought, well, that gives us a third act, and then they thought, well, in fact, it gives us a whole new film. In the whole new film, it centres on the character of Maya, played by Jessica Chastain, who is a young CIA operative who's become absolutely obsessive about the hunt for bin Laden. The film, the relationship of the film to reality has been, as we discussed in some length last week with Kathryn Bigelow, a subject of some discussion. But there is the suggestion that in the background of all this, the character upon whom Maya is based is actually the same character that Carrie from Homeland is based on. I mean, certainly they have similarities. So she is at the centre of the drama, which is about the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Here's a clip.
You'll notice the stealth panels, similar to what we use on the B-2. The rotors have been muffled with decibel killers. It's slower than the Black Hawk, lacks the offense and the stability, but it can hide.
So, hey, excuse me, but what do we need this for in Libya? I mean, Gaddafi's anti-air is virtually non-existent.
Maya, you want to brief them?
There are two narratives about the location of Osama bin Laden. The one that you're most familiar with is that UBL is hiding in a cave in the tribal areas, that he's surrounded by a large contingent of loyal fighters. But that narrative is pre-9/11 understanding of UBL. The second narrative is that he's living in a city. Living in a city with multiple points of egress and entry, access to communications, so that he can keep in touch with the organization. You can't run a global network of interconnected cells from a cave.
So Kathryn Bigelow has been described by some people, I mean, in the past, certainly, as the most macho filmmaker around, and which was meant both, as a compliment and an insult. And if what it means is that she makes films that are as visceral and as muscular and as tough and as action-led as some of her male counterparts, and that's absolutely true. I mean, I've been really interested by Bigelow's movies right from the very beginning. I remember going to see The Loveless on a double bill with Eraserhead when that was a kind of late-night double bill. Everyone of Near Dark, holds a particular place in my heart because it was the first film I ever went to see with Linda.
Is that The Good Lady Wife?
The Good Lady Wife.
Is it a romantic movie?
Near Dark. Yeah, I think so. Vampire film. Yeah, yes, I think it was.
Touching moment. Actually, you remind me, the first date with Mrs. Mayo was Death Wish.
No.
You're classy. You're recalling classy. This week with the passing of Michael Winner. I remember that. That was our first date.
Classy date.
It might have been Death Wish 2, actually.
Even worse. Even worse. Where do we go from here? Okay, so, and then, Point Break, which I like very, very much. And, Strange Days, which incidentally caused an awful lot of controversy at the time, which people sort of forget about now. But the interesting thing about it is when people say she's macho, what they mean is, that she makes movies that look to some people like they're directed by men, okay? Which is a whole sort of presumption about what a movie directed by a man should look like and what a movie directed by a woman should look like. The interesting thing about 0.30 is that obviously it centres in on there is a strong woman right at the centre of it, and there are strong women throughout the film. And what Kathryn Bigelow has said is that actually when you investigate the story that she's looking at, that Mark Bowles written the screenplay for, this happens to be true. This isn't that she decided to make a point and make a feminist point. This is how the story played out. It was true that those operatives or versions of those operatives were actually at the centre of the film, and I think it makes the film. If just before Christmas we had that thing, Codename Geronimo, which was a film of the same story, which was the most boring meat and potatoes military film. It's like, yeah, fine, we've seen all these people before. They're the same old thing. It's a bunch of blokes running, and there was nothing about it that made you go, oh, that's interesting. Nothing about it that made you step back. When I first saw 0.30, before any of this fuss blew up about it, the first thing I thought, the most overwhelming thought, was it's amazing that having seen this story played out really recently, like within the last 2 weeks on screen, and obviously knowing about it at the time just through the newspapers as much as anybody did, how much it made you sit on the edge of your seat thinking, I know how this is going to work out, but I don't know how this is going to work out. And I was reminded, as I always am, of Apollo 13. You know that the Apollo, sorry if it's a plot spoiler, they got home. Doesn't mean that when you're watching the film, it's not terribly tense. And that is not something to be underestimated. And if you don't believe me, go watch Codename Geronimo. When you know how the whole thing pans out, you sit there and you watch it and go, yeah, that, and from 98 minutes, thank you very much, bye-bye. So I think, for one thing, that's important. The other thing is it's very, very tense, but it is also very, very dark. I mean, Zero Dark 30 isn't called Zero Dark 30 for nothing. And of course, there is a connection back to near dark. There is a dark.
It means half past midnight.
I know it does, but it's a phrase which is enigmatic. I mean, a title can mean a lot of things. Sorry, but yes, of course it can.
I was just saying, but Zero Dark 30 is military speak for half past midnight.
Yes, but half past midnight isn't the reason it's called half past midnight. You know,
it's not called half past midnight.
It's called Zero Dark 30. You know what I mean, okay? You know, it's like Transformers Dark of the Moon, because that's a military term. It doesn't, you know, it has to mean, so it has to be enigmatic, right?
What else does it mean then?
Well, it means that the darkness does descend on the drama. And it is a drama, even in terms of its palette. The colour palette of the film goes from not very bright at the beginning to darker and darker and darker, and to the point that actually when you get to the end, it's quite hard to see what's going on.
Yes, now I saw this on a disc, right?
Right.
And I thought, no, I should have seen this in the cinema, because don't wait for this to come out on DVD, because it is so dark. You actually have to turn off all the lights in the house to actually see everything. So in the movies, this is going to be fine. On a disc, it's not.
Well, I had the perfect experience of it. I saw it, you know, perfectly projected by the magnificent Dave Norris, and it looked fantastic in the cinema. But it is true that it is a dark story. It is not a triumphalist story. It is not a story with a yay flag-waving ending. It is a story about a descent into darkness, and the darkness which you know infects all the characters. Centrally, Jessica Chastain's character, at the very, very beginning, you know, she has something that looks like it's kind of, you know, idealism, and as the thing goes on, it becomes obsession and twist, and it becomes more and more questionable and ambiguous. And I do think that even though we know how the story ends, people will be surprised by how much it doesn't feel at the end. Like the victory seems to be terribly Pyrrhic. Now, this leads into a question about, and we have to address this, and we talked about it before, but just briefly, the question about whether or not the film in any way endorses torture. Here's my take on it. If somebody said to you in a real-life event, okay, that the CIA interrogated somebody using waterboarding and torture, they didn't get any information out of them. Later on, they interrogated them with that in the background by being nice to them, and they got information out of them that it turned out they already had, but they didn't notice because they were too busy indulging in torture. And they then turned around and said, well, that's a justification for torture. You go, no, it isn't. That's completely the opposite. That's actually proof that it doesn't work. Now, however one cares to read the film, that is the narrative of the film. And people are being somewhat perverse if they look at that narrative and go, well, that narrative says torture produced those results. Obviously, everyone can read the film differently, but that's the narrative bones of it. And take that away from the film and all the fuss and all the rest of it, and imagine that story was told to you by somebody else, and they said, and the conclusion of the story is torture gets results. You'd go, no, it doesn't. The conclusion of the story is completely the opposite of that. And the thing to remember, as far as I'm concerned with this, is what Bigelow's done, and you used this phrase, and you're quite right.
You're quoting me now.
I am, okay. Because you said something that was intelligent and insightful. And
a rare moment.
It was so rare that it stuck in my mind. You said that it has this straight-faced look. It's a blank expression. It's a sort of numb expression. There's a key scene when they're listening, and Obama is on the television saying, we don't use torture. And they don't react. And then they carry on. You said it's a numbness, and it is. The film is about a descending numbness and a descending darkness, and it is a film which goes from a position of half light to a position of darkness. It is a film which depicts really brutal, nasty stuff in a manner which I read as being a condemnation of that, but which the filmmaker has imagined that the audience is intelligent enough to read. It is also, as far as I was concerned, gripping. The performances were really, really good. The exception of John Barrowman turning up very briefly, which was really weird.
I missed this altogether.
Yeah, your brain just blanked it out. You just went, I don't believe that's the guy from Doctor Who and Torchwood. But he's got a very small cameo, and he's walking down a corridor with a bloke reading a file. And you go, hey, pardon?
Is he credited as bloke next to bloke?
He is. That's how he's credited. He's credited as that bloke from Torchwood. But just let me ask you very quickly before you read that. Yeah. Did you feel, as I did, that it was gripping and engaging, and even though you know how the story's going to pan out, it made you tense?
Yes, it did make me tense. I have a slightly more nuanced position on the torture thing, which we went through last week.